Welcome to Dead Time with your host, Holly Faust. Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Dead Time Tales. Tonight, we're going to be steering a little bit away from the paranormal, at least the investigative side, somewhat. We're going to be traversing through what I like to call paranormal adjacent. And not only talking about things such as psychics and mediumship, but more importantly, we're going to be having a little bit of a discussion about mental health and psychic mediums. This is a topic that we really don't talk about enough, and I think it's really, really overlooked. And a lot of psychic mediums don't know where to go or what to do. We talk a lot about protecting our own energy and about our protection bubbles and protecting those around us. But we really don't discuss things about our own psyche and our mental health and what we as mediums and psychics can do when faced with challenges. So tonight I have an amazing guest. Her name is Dana Vollmer, and she's a gifted medium. She's a tarot card reader, and she also has a penchant for the paranormal and is equally passionate about mental health. So welcome, Dana.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is a subject that I'm very, very excited to talk about.
When we were discussing it, when I had talked about bringing you on, and you had said that you wanted to discuss this, like, I was so excited because I'm very open with a lot of people in my community know
Mhm.
that I kind of like have a lot of neurodivergency. Like, I have an odd DHD diagnosis, a
Yay.
kind of autism ADHD kind of combo. But more importantly, I also have a PTSD, which is chronic, and I have
As do
borderline
I.
personality disorder.
Hmm.
So, for me, like, people really don't understand, when you're traversing through, because I know as a psychic, um I went through a lot of mental health challenges in the beginning with my gifts. I thought I was crazy.
Me
So,
too.
yeah, so before we get into the meat and bones of it all, can you just tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, a little bit more than what I put in my little blurb for you?
So, as far as the psychic abilities go, I was seeing spirits since I was a child. I mean, it took me till like 11, 12 years old to realize that most people don't see shimmering silhouettes of people walking around houses and walking through graveyards. Like, my mom had a best friend who lived across the street from Palmer Cemetery in Fishtown in Philadelphia. And when I would sleep over, I would sleep in a bed in the front bedroom of the house. And I would look across the street at the cemetery because cemeteries are cool. Why
Mhm.
wouldn't you? But I
Exactly.
would literally see shimmering silhouettes of spirits walking in the cemetery at night. And it took me until I was like 11 or 12 years old to be like, you don't see that? Like, this isn't normal. And for my mom to tell me, like, no, Dana, other people don't see that. Like, other people don't hear children giggling in their bedrooms at night and like hear like voices. And then when I was like, oh, okay. And then when I became a teenager and realized mental health was a thing, I thought I was crazy. But I wouldn't tell anybody that I was hearing voices because when I started learning what schizophrenia was, like, I didn't hear those voices. And when doctors would ask me to explain like what I heard, it never classified as schizophrenia. And as I got older, I realized I was an empath, and that became equally as hard on me as well because as I was navigating, because I've always been into the paranormal, but I started, forgive me,
No, you're
um,
fine.
as I started navigating the mental health, like the mental health thing, because I started with that at a young age because my parents divorced when I was 14. Well, they separated when I was 14. It took forever for the divorce. My parents got me into therapy and learning more about mental health and getting misdiagnosed at a young age because it turns out I'm bipolar. Um, Getting a major depressive disorder diagnosis at a young age and being navigating the misdiagnosis of that, it it was just really frustrating because when I learned what an empath was, I had to start asking myself, is this mine or is this theirs? Which is something that when I started working with investigations, I have to ask myself all the time, is this mine or is this theirs? Being in large crowds of people, is this mine or is this theirs? And then when I actually got, when I actually accepted, we'll say accepted the bipolar disorder, now dealing with mediumship, I and the bipolar disorder, that's a big question I have to ask all the time. Is this mine or is this theirs? And learning now, like how you say, like mediums have to protect ourselves, we have to ground our energy, we have to do all of that. When you're dealing with mental health struggles, you have to ground and protect yourself so much more. And I don't think that people realize that, like, mediums in general, I feel like are more prone to mental health struggles because of the question, is this mine or is this someone else's? Is this mine or is this theirs? And I don't think that people realize, like, how much more open we are and what we can take home. And it's not even just from a paranormal aspect, like just from going to a concert. Like you can take home all the positive energy from, like, say, like the Eagles parade,
Right.
or like an amazing concert, but you can be next to that one person in the crowd who's just shit energy and wind up taking that home with you. And it's such a difficult thing to traverse when you have your own bullshit that you have to deal with.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like, for me, I just would start blurting things out as a kid, telling my
Yeah.
mom things that were gonna happen, and, she freaked out, and, my mom is an assimilated Catholic. She was in residential schools and, went through a lot as a child herself, and so she automatically went, "Oh, you're possessed by demons." And, she took me to Catholic church and said, and we lived in a very Irish and Italian Catholic community, and, she needs to be exercised. And, thankfully the priest didn't right away, like, no, 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 like they didn't feed that into her, but
Mhm.
I kind of learned at that point I shouldn't say these things around her.
Yeah.
Because, like, at that point I still hadn't learned enough about things in the church, like the mystics and the the psychics that were in the church that actually, became saints. I didn't learn about that. I was just a kid at the time. But then as I got older and I had quelled, my abilities for so long, I just kept stuffing them and stuffing them and stuffing them. And it wasn't until like 9/11 when they came back in an abundance, because I spent most of my summers in a Hell's Kitchen. So I knew a lot of the boys that were firemen and policemen that were there. My
Mhm.
cousin had at one time, which we didn't know at the time, worked in the one Trade Center building, but she had been moved a week prior to a satellite office, which we never knew. And my priest was actually on one of the planes that hit the towers. So I was inundated with all of this stuff coming at once that I just had, like, I don't really call it a breakthrough, but I had a breakdown and ended up committing myself, because I thought I was losing it. And I was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic at one point. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at another point. And it was simply because, they would do all these tests on me and they would be like, "Oh, do you hear voices?" Yes. But I didn't know at the time. I was still young. I didn't know what I was doing was a psychic
Mhm.
ability. I was only in my early 20s. And I said, I would say, "Yes, I hear voices." Well, what are they? They talk to me all day. They help me through the day. They tell me when to get up. They tell me when to eat. They tell me, they talk to me, they tell me things. Well, who are they? I'm like, "Well, one's my grandfather, one's my best friend," because I lost my best friend to suicide. And I would hear their voices constantly. And so the doctor, like, literally, like, one diagnosed me with paranoid schizophrenia because I said I would get paranoid around people because they were always talking about me and not understanding that I was feeling what they were feeling and what they were thinking, and I had no clue. And it wasn't until, oh my gosh, years later when I actually joined a very prominent paranormal team where I met a psychologist who studied parapsychology, and we had to do, psychological testing every so often. And he was like, "You don't have any of these disorders." He said, "You're just psychic." And I'm like, "Oh." Well, that
What
makes
good was that?
sense. It just took until I met someone that truly understood. Like, he says, "Yeah, are the voices telling you to hurt yourself or others?" And I'm like, "No, they just talk to me." Well, yeah, that's, you're hearing dead people. And I actually had a priest who told me I was an empath, that worked with our team when someone was attacked by something spiritually on that battlefield in Gettysburg.
Mhm.
And, I was, doing Reiki to them, and he kept saying, "Is it residual or is it not? Is it something that's active?" And I looked at him and I'm like, "I don't know, you're the priest, you tell me." And he was like, "But you're the empath, you should know this." And I'm like, What's that?" So, and that's when my whole journey went, because then, through finding mental health care practitioners that really, because I was on every medication, from lithium to Seroquel to, everything under the sun. Seroquel literally made me sleep for 3 days. And I was the lowest dose. So I'm like, I can't need this if I can't get out of bed."
Exactly.
And, and it was through that work is where I was diagnosed with the chronic PTSD, because of the flashbacks and everything that I was
Mhm.
experiencing. And then the borderline personality disorder, which there is no medication for. There's only treatment through, like, cognitive behavioral
Yeah.
therapy. So, yeah, it's interesting because I think there's such a stigma attached to mental health too,
There
that
is.
people are afraid to get diagnosed.
Yeah, I was actually afraid of my bipolar diagnosis. So at first, I was diagnosed as major depressive disorder, and then I was diagnosed as bipolar 1, but I kinda like how nowadays kids are seeking out diagnoses because of
Yep,
TikTok? Well, I kinda did that as a teen. I sought out a bipolar 1 diagnosis because I was 19 and in a group with a bunch of other bipolar people, and I
right.
felt like they were kindred spirits, and I was like, "Well, this totally explains me. This is me. I am this." And they I basically told the psychiatrist, like, "I have all these symptoms." And it turns out like, well, yeah, I'm bipolar, but I'm bipolar 2. So like I have the symptoms, but they diagnosed me as bipolar 1. I've never had a manic episode. I went 6 years without medication. If I was bipolar 1, I would never have been able to go 6 years without medication.
Yeah, that's what
Not
I went through too, is with the bipolar. I was actually diagnosed with bipolar 2, but I
mhm,
had, manic breakthroughs, and that's, learning that's borderline personality disorder
yeah,
mimics bipolar.
exactly. So then I was explaining it to the team that I have now. So then they changed it to major depressive, but the treatment wasn't working, and I had a really bad year. Like, the last 18 months have been horrible for me, and the I was hospitalized, and I also was in a partial hospitalization program, and the doctor there I was in this program before, and she was like, "I'm so glad you're letting me do your meds now because you're not bipolar 1, you're not major depressive, you're bipolar 2." And she put me on a mood stabilizer, and the rain clouds have parted, and just being on the right medication, it means everything. And I was so worried, like I was so worried about going back on meds because I was just starting to really get into my gifts
Mhm.
and really getting in touch with my gifts and like helping people, like really helping people, going into homes, doing investigations, doing Reiki on people, doing Reiki on homes, clearing spirits, and like really getting into like, the really good work that comes with paranormal, like really touching people's lives. And I didn't
Mhm.
want any medication to interfere with that. So I was scared. But my doctor now and that doctor, with the right medication, I noticed that it hasn't influenced any of my gifts. If anything, I feel like because I'm more stable, my gifts are stronger.
Exactly, and that was, something that you and I had also
Yeah.
discussed, because I know when I was on all these other meds, like, I just was numb,
Exactly.
and I couldn't connect to anything or anyone. Or and then for me, I went off everything when I got pregnant the 3rd time.
Mhm.
I was like 12 weeks before I even knew I was pregnant, and I was on, like, mood stabilizers, I was on antidepressants, I was on so much stuff, I went off everything. And I after I had her, I had a period of time where I always suffered with postpartum depression. So I had that period, within the first 6, 8 months where I was struggling. But then it was like things calmed down and things became normal again. And once I got, that true borderline diagnosis and started working on, like, the cognitive behavioral therapy and learning, the things that worked for me, and learning
Mhm.
not only how to ground as a psychic, but how to ground as a person with PTSD, like making sure
Yes.
I know where I'm safe, I'm here. Tell when I have those periods where I disassociate, telling myself where I am, that I'm touching the ground, that I've got feet on wood, and those things truly help me. Now, the last few years, I have horrific anxiety. So the only medication I've had to go on is I take an anti-anxiety med. Now, for years I was on Xanax, but I finally found a doctor that said, "Let's try something different." And we went on a different medication, and it has made such a world of difference for me, because the Xanax, all it would do was put me to sleep.
Yeah.
And this I take in the morning and at night, and I still have panic attacks, and especially in a car, but it doesn't have that effect that the other meds had on me. And then they have me on like a mini presser, but it's actually used to treat nightmares for PTSD.
I'm on I'm on that as well.
Yep,
And
and
it helps me
I
flash
can't
out
get
as well.
over it. I can't get over the
Yes.
difference it's made for me, because I don't remember my dreams unless they're like a vision dream where I need to remember them.
Mhm.
But I would wake up and I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't go back to sleep, and I'd be shaking, and I'd be sweating, and I'd be panicky. And like they said, they think I block my dreams unless it's a message that I really need to hear, but I would still have all the physical pensions of it all.
And the other thing too, I think that a lot of mediums don't realize that they have trauma as well. I noticed that it's real common, like, a lot of mediums that I talk to will be like, "I have PTSD."
Yep.
And I don't know if it's getting PTSD just from being a medium itself, because I mean, we see a lot of shit. We experience a lot of shit. We put, like, our emotional and mental health on the line just from being mediums, and then when you get into the investigations and you see what you see and we feel what we feel and we pick up from other people, that in itself is traumatic. But then to have a traumatic life
Oh,
and have
definitely.
that and then to have that CPTSD, a diagnosis, like, I've had, mine's chronic.
Mhm.
I've had multiple, like, just stacked events that have individually would have caused me PTSD, but then to stack them, I'm actually going through a trauma therapy program right now that is a bottom-up approach, so it's body focused.
Right.
So it's very focused on grounding and processing physically in the body your trauma as opposed to a cognitive approach, because you
And
can
I
talk.
struggled with that, like, and that's the other thing people don't realize, there's more than one approach.
Yeah, and it's been a life changer. I went through this therapy last year and I'm going for what they call a tune up this year.
Mhm.
And it's been a life changer. Just feeling safe in my body again, because I don't think that, like, going through an event and not realizing you have PTSD from it, and then going through an event and knowing you have PTSD from it. Like, I've gone through events that I know I have PTSD from, and then going through other events that I did not realize were trauma,
Right.
and that if I just went through them alone, I would have gotten PTSD.
Yeah, and for me, I always thought, when I was diagnosed,
Mhm.
this is going back 20 some years ago, I thought PTSD only happened to, like, people that were veterans, like, that served in
Yeah.
the military, that did war, and it took a lot of talking with my therapist to explain to me, like, I had trauma from the age of 2 when my dad was in a motorcycle accident,
Yeah.
and I can remember that. I can't remember a lot, like, my kids laugh at me all the time because I forget everything, but I could sit down and give extremely graphic details that no two-year-old child should be able to retain about the day of my dad's car accident, like, when he was in his motorcycle accident,
Mhm.
who was there, what happened, the fact that everybody went and left me, a two-year-old, alone at my grandmother's house. Just me. There were nobody else there. I just sat on the floor wondering where they all went, and, and then they all came back hours later, and I just had no clue, like, how much like, my dad was my whole world, and
Yeah.
how much my world just changed in that one day, and I still, like, can sit back and remember everything I felt. And, and they said the like, an important thing for me was learning the difference between the post-traumatic stress disorder and then acute stress disorder,
Yeah.
because that, also compounds onto people with PTSD. With people that have, like, an acute stress disorder, yeah, they have issues, for a little bit following a traumatic episode, but eventually they're able to get over it, and their body and mind move on, where people with PTSD, that even that acute stress causes so many issues. Like, I know for me, like, I've been in homes where I've especially in my area where it's rife with drugs, doing
Mhm.
investigations, and I can feel, the previous people that lived there who were, and I'm a recovering addict, but I can feel everything they felt as addicts living in that home. Even though they're no longer there, they left that imprint,
Yeah.
and people don't understand, like, how much that can affect a home.
Exactly. Like, just that imprint that it leaves in a house, like, and that's what I'm saying, like, for mediums, like, we're putting everything on the line because especially with, like, the fact that's why I'm saying it's traumatic because we encounter so much, and, like, you basically have to relive a part of your life that you probably wouldn't rather not
Right.
when you walk into a home and there's a memory in time that's just hanging there, and for me, if there is any type of assaults
Yep.
in a home, and then I'm stuck reliving that and having to I call it the glass onion.
Mhm.
And I'm sure this will make sense to you. When you walk into a home and there's so many memories that you have to actually like peel through the layers and look through the glass onion and like kind of focus in on which layer of the glass onion you want to look for that makes the most sense with your investigation.
Yep. Yeah, we
And
actually call that excavating.
yeah.
Yeah, like, and I learned that from John Sable. He wrote actually a book called Ghost Excavation.
Oh,
And so that's what I've always called it, like, but I like that onion approach too because it's kinda like,
you're
peeling
just
back the
peeling back the
layers.
layers, looking for the one that makes the most sense to you. And it's like a
Yeah.
glass onion. It's like old glass shop windows where they're
Mhm.
real kind of foggy, but it's like
Yep.
an onion, you have to peel them all back to get to the one that you like. And so if there's anything that has to do with like assault or sexual assault, like that to me is it's traumatic. I'm like and narcissistic abuse. And if I can walk in and feel a narcissist, I'm just like here we go again. I have to ground, not spiritually ground, but I have to actually ground myself. I'm safe. The narcissist isn't here. This is in the past. I'm safe. Like, this is an
Yeah,
investigation.
and that's a hard part because I worked for one for, like, almost 15 years in the paranormal, so
Yeah. So you walk in, you're like, all right,
Alright, he's
this is
here.
my reality. That's
Yeah.
the past.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
this
don't
is
think
this is
people
what happened.
realize that.
And yeah, and like for me, for a good majority of the last, over decade and a half of my career, I wasn't just going into homes.
Mhm.
I was going into very predominantly, historical hauntings, like prisons, penitentiaries, asylums, which by the way, those are my favorite places. I feel right at home. And it's so odd because, like, people always say, like, "Where would you rather investigate?" And I'm like, "An asylum."
So you
yes,
can
it's
connect to
horrendous
that.
to feel what the people have gone through, but at the same time, I feel safer with people like that than I do in a prison.
Well, so the only like real asylum I have experience with, and I haven't investigated. However, if you ever go there, count me in. I would love to go on an investigation with you and like experience different investigation styles. But Penhurst,
I'm gonna be there in May.
I seen that.
I'm doing the
So
Paracon there, so and I have been there.
I've got
Um,
actual photographic evidence from Penhurst. I was there on a historical tour,
yeah,
and I did the haunted houses just because it was a way for me to get into the property.
right. A lot of people couldn't like I think for a
Yeah.
while they weren't even doing investigations there. They were
So, and I had so many experiences just being a medium. Like I had my clothes tugged,
and
especially in the beginning when it wasn't that big.
right. Oh yeah, and I know for me,
I had my hair lifted like this.
well, and I've watched Suffer the Little Children,
So did I.
which is the documentary that was the expose that basically shut them
Yeah.
down. And I always recommend to any investigator going there, like before you go or when you come back, depending upon how you investigate, watch it
So
because it really opens up your eyes.
what got me was I'm not going to share a lot just to keep privacy, but I knew an individual who what was developmentally challenged who was
Hmm.
going to be put into that home. And
Right.
when their the parents saw the home, they said they cried and said, "I wouldn't put my dog in there."
And I
And
have heard that from a lot of people.
yeah, and this individual had, ties to my family, and I went in there knowing that had I lived in a different era with the diagnosis I have now,
We would be
there was
there.
a chance that I'd be there.
Oh, definitely. Like, I mean, I know when I went to St. Albans, which is an
Mhm,
asylum in Radford, Virginia, um, I just knew that if I had been born in a different time period, I would have been there, whether it had been for female hysteria or
mhm.
whatever, because you know me, I'm a boisterous person. I don't take
Yeah,
crap from anybody. And I don't know if I would have been that way back in that period of time, but then with all the other things, like I said, I mean, I wonder how many people that had been put into these places were truly psychic and no one knew how to help them. And
exactly.
and I think that's why I have that tie to them. And also, for me with Penhurst, I worked very closely with parent to parent connections, which is like for parents or children with disabilities. And through that, I work very closely with like MHMR, with with all the different drug and alcohol, all the different county organizations. So I heard so many stories from people, not who were there, but who
Mhm.
worked there. Who were employed there towards the end. That were when I was first coming into the field, where they were slowly retiring from the field.
Yeah.
And I think that's what attracted me to the asylums, because certain ones, like if you look at the history of like Trans Allegheny, that was a place that truly was created with good intention, but became, as money and other things became more important, those good intentions got lost to the wayside.
Yeah. And those places are truly heartbreaking, but I feel like as far as being able to connect with the spirits, you can connect with them on some level because you can relate to their pain. If you've ever
Hmm.
been hospitalized, you know what it's like. Like, and granted, like we were hospitalized in what would be considered a lap of luxury.
But it's still dehumanizing. I mean, I
Yeah.
know the one location that I was at, I was a smoker at the time.
Mhm.
And like you can't smoke whenever you want, you can't eat whenever you want, you can't do, you get, like, I don't know how it was for you, but when I went in, they basically strip search you.
Yeah.
My first night I was spent in a locked room with only a mattress on the floor and a camera watching me all night. You know, because I was in there on suicide watch, so, for me, like, that it was for me, I can't imagine what it was like when it was an even worse of a situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's still some things like, and it's like you understand why they have to do it, but it doesn't take away the fact that it is dehumanizing.
Totally.
And it's like, there's nothing, I mean, I've been strip searched twice, and there's just a piece of you that you understand why they have to do it. They have to, if they have to check for self-harm, they have to check for
Right.
all these things, and they have to do it for your safety. But there's something, it takes away a piece of you when you have to stand there in front of that female staff and just when you were at your lowest of lows and they're telling you to take your clothes off.
And it's even worse, I think, for people who have experienced, a sexual assault in ways because
Yeah,
it makes you relive that again.
it
And
does.
I know, like, I have felt that as a psychic and a medium in locations, where
Mhm.
I have felt, that pain and that, the suffering that some of these people went through, these patients, and there was a lot of assaults that occurred
Yeah.
at the time, and there still is, but, like, they were more rampant back, years
Well,
ago
yeah.
when these places were up and
'Cause they
running.
weren't regulated like they were now. There wasn't
Right.
cameras. There's, and even nowadays, there still isn't enough staff, but there's at least enough staff to like prevent a lot of that from happening. But back then, they didn't have the like the ratio of staff
Mhm.
that they have now.
Oh, yeah, and yeah, there was, like, very few, and I think that was one of the biggest problems with places like Trans-Allegheny. They
Mhm.
became so overwhelmed that they started putting the more at-risk cases in cages.
And that's so inhumane, but like what when you're left with no options, what do you do?
Right, and I mean, I remember Trans-Allegheny was one of the places that hit me the hardest. I really experienced so much emotion going through there, and at that time when I had gone there, I didn't realize the importance of protecting that part of my own psyche,
Mhm.
because I was still a wild investigator,
Yeah.
Um, "I don't need protection. What are you talking about protection?" "I don't need none of that crap." And I didn't realize how it was affecting me until I started bringing it home.
Yeah.
And my husband and my child, especially being a borderline, like, I was constantly going off the handle because I was experiencing so much emotion from other people, and I wasn't letting it go. I wasn't giving it back.
Exactly, and that's the one thing, like, with investigating, like, mediums have to take extra care of their mental health, even if they don't have any diagnoses, if they don't take that extra care, and I feel like every medium should learn some type of, like, CBT
Oh,
skills
I agree 100%.
because, like, and I feel like every medium should have a therapist.
And that was something I can say about the team that I was on. We did have a psychologist with us for a very long time. Like, we had team psychologists that worked because that was part of our investigative process.
Mhm.
We ruled out everything because we did, some work with the church. So you had to rule out psychological, physical, all this stuff. So and it was a very difficult case. We were required to do another psychological screening to see if there was any differentiation. I think it was like an MMPI, I think it was. And to see if there was any differentiation from our original and to see if there was any issues that were coming up that we weren't even aware of at the time. And unfortunately, we got away from it because of other things that were happening within the team. But I always remember that because I had been a member of other teams where they didn't take that approach to protecting the psyche of their not only their psychics, but their team members in general.
Well, yeah, and I feel like it's so important in the paranormal field to protect your psyche and to have a therapist. And even if you don't talk to them about the paranormal, I feel like it's so important to keep yourself grounded and to have those CBTs and to have that approach and to be able to ground not just on the psychic level, but to be able to ground and remind yourself you're safe and to be comfortable in your body. Because if you don't have those tools, you're not going to be able to psychically ground.
And I didn't realize myself how important that was. Like, I don't ground, I do what we call sky. I
Hmm.
ground up. Unless
Yeah.
I'm hugging a tree, then I'm good. But, we were at a camp. We used to do a thing called Camp Paranormal. Like, I think we did like 3 or 4 of them where we went out into these big camps in the middle of nowhere and just did paranormal, like, lectures and investigations for, like, sometimes a week.
Mhm.
And, I remember a person who became a very good friend of mine for a long time talking about grounding and energy and energy bodies, and they said, "And then there's those of us that don't think they need to ground, don't think they need to shield, don't think they need to do anything, and then all of a sudden they're do, and then ploop, they blow up glitter all over your ass." And I realized at that point, wow, they're talking about me. And I didn't realize I was doing that to people, that I was just going about my, merry old way. And then all of a sudden I would just explode with all of this pent up energy that I wasn't getting rid of and that I wasn't giving away. And I didn't realize how that wasn't just affecting me, but it was affecting the other people around me.
Oh yeah, because then it doesn't just affect the other people around you. It can affect your relationships. It can affect
Yeah.
your job. It can affect everything.
Yeah. And when I heard that discussion, I was just like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And that's when I learned that I didn't have to, because, I had an energy body drawing done
Mhm.
and found out, my energy body has no feet.
Oh,
So, yeah, I'll have to show you the picture sometime. It's really cool. There's no feet. It's just a curve. I float. And that's when I learned that that's probably why I can't ground and why I'm not comfortable grounding, because I have nothing to ground with. Because I like vibrate at a higher level off, and that's why they, like she said, no wonder why you can't feel your feet, because I have so much neuropathy in my feet. I don't feel them half the time. So she's like, "That's why, because they're not real." They're just, they're just skin and bones. There's nothing there to support them. And, that's when I learned that I can ground by hugging a tree, soaking my feet in water, going up and pushing it up and out through my crown. Like, and people think, well, when you say grounding, that you have to go down and through, like through. And I try to explain, no, it's whatever way you can best get rid of all this junk
exactly.
and get rid of it, and then center yourself. I said the most important thing is how you center yourself when it's all done.
Yeah. And I don't think enough people realize that. And like I often joke like with my therapist because like I told her I'm a witch and I'm like, witchcraft is just spicy psychology. I'm
Mhm.
like, because you're CBT based or and like DBT. You have to learn. I feel like a lot of people need to learn DBT skills too.
Right.
I'm like, but you're CBT based, but you also teach me to ground. I was like, do you know how much grounding I have to do in my in my witchcraft?
Oh, and that's what I tell people all the time. I'm like, if you wanna really learn how to do these things, just become friends with a witch.
Yeah, because
And
we'll teach you.
right, and we, like, have our own little cliques, you know? Hopefully,
Yeah,
we're gonna be doing a roundtable about that, so anybody who's interested in that aspect,
and it
pay
is.
attention.
It's all spicy psychology, but it's for the greater good. We all
Yeah.
have different. Um,
Manifestation is a form of psychology, I always felt.
yeah, and we all have different different intentions and different goals that we want to use, but we all have to use a different type of psychology to get there.
Right.
And then you get into therapy and they start teaching you these tools and you're like, "Wait a minute, I use these tools in my practice."
Yeah. And with me, it took me forever to find, and unfortunately, the psychologist who was my therapist ended up going back to work for the prison system, and then he got his own private practice back again, but at that point, no one could get in to see him, but he was a humanist.
Oh.
And, his family was very devout Catholic, but he was a pure humanist, and I got so much out of my therapy sessions with him compared to any other therapist I ever encountered before and after him. And it was odd because, this, we always say how things come full circle. When
Mhm.
I started investigating with the large team I was with, the psychologist that was part of that team went to college with him. They got their master's degrees together.
Oh my god, that's such a crazy
Yeah,
coincidence.
and they were completely across the state from each other at this point. He was out near Pittsburgh and we're here, in the middle of the state. So yeah, it was just like you think after all these years. So then, when I started delving into this all in my paranormal life, it was like 360. I found the same type of therapist within our paranormal community that kind of got things.
That is so awesome.
And that's what I was
Crazy how it
grateful
works
for.
out.
And yeah, and I was always grateful for that because I didn't get hung up with these psychiatrists and psychologists. Like my psychiatrist, he was from England, where they're a lot more open minded.
Yeah.
And, so it just, I was very lucky that when I started going through it all, I found people that were open minded and looked into more than just the textbook definitions. Because, like
Yeah.
I said, the first few I met, they were like, oh, yeah, you're a paranoid schizophrenia. And I'm like, what?
I always decided that, like, when it came to that doctors and therapists, I wait
Hmm.
for a long time before I tell them anything. Like,
See, I was horrible about that stuff. I would like go right in there and start crying. And I'd be like, but I'm hearing all these voices and I don't know what to do. And I have diarrhea of the mouth.
no, I was very selective. I played a game.
Hmm.
I wouldn't tell them anything about that. I would tell them all my other symptoms, but I was very tight-lipped on that because I did not want that diagnosis
Right.
because I knew it wasn't true. So I would wait and then, like, with, like, my psychiatrist now, it's, like, little things like I read tarot cards, I do mediumship, but she's been seeing me for years, so she knows I'm not schizophrenic. So if I say I
Right.
do mediumship, she's like, "Oh, okay. Well, you're
Yeah,
definitely
see,
not
and
crazy, your meds
I
are
didn't
working."
share any of that with any of the previous ones. Like my one that I'd gone to for years and got me my borderline diagnosis, I would share that stuff with him because I
Yeah.
felt comfortable. But like I am a comedian. Like I make jokes about everything. And around the time that one of my hospitalizations, the movie The Sixth Sense came out. And, with the hospital that I was at for treatment, they get a lot of emergent cases that come in through the emergency room. Like people get drunk and try to slice
Mhm.
themselves up and, they admit them for 24-hour hold or whatever. And I remember being in a therapy session because I hated group therapy because I always came out worse than when I went in because I was feeding off of everybody. But this guy looked at me and he said, well, what are you in for? And I looked at him. I said, did you ever see that movie, The Sixth Sense? Oh, yeah, the kid sees dead people. I said, "Well, I hear 'em." And that poor guy didn't come near me the rest of the time he was there. But I think we have to sometimes laugh at ourselves
Well, yeah.
because I think that's also healing. Because I do that crap all the time. Like, I'll be at a location and I'm having a full-on conversation, and somebody be like, "Yo, who are you talking to?" And I'm like, You mean there's nobody here?" And they'll be like, "No, there's nobody there with you. Who are you?" I said, "There's somebody literally here." And, but I've learned that, that's the way I keep myself safe.
Yeah, you have to
Because
have a
yeah,
sense
I
of
am
humor about
literally
it.
talking to someone. It's just that nobody else sees them but me.
Yeah, if you don't have a sense of humor about it, like, what are you gonna do? Like, I make jokes about my mental health all the time.
Oh yeah, I do too. I always, like I have scars, being a borderline, we are
Mhm.
self-injurious and like people say, "Well, where did that come from?" And I said, "Well, I was good friends with a razor." And they'll be like, they're like, "How could you talk like that?" I'm like, "If I can't have fun with it, I think I would go even crazier than I already am."
And that's the other thing, people with PTSD have really dark sense of humor.
I have no sense of humor. That's the ADHD side of me, that autistic side of me. I have very little self humor. Like people will tell me jokes, and I'll be like, "That wasn't funny." My kids hate it, but yet my humor is dark and twisted, and also sometimes very inappropriate.
Oh,
and it embarrasses people. Like my the former director of the team I was on, like people hated being around us because we would go from like serious to dirty jokes and dark humor like that quick, and people would hate it. And I'm like, but when you've gone through the things, like most of us with PTSD have really gone through some shit. And if you can't look at things in a comical way, you will go crazy, like literally want to commit yourself with pain and anger and
exactly.
humiliation.
I find the most dark, twisted stuff funny. Like,
Me too, man.
perfect
Like some of the
example.
things.
Are you aware of the Terrifier franchise?
No.
Art the Clown? Okay. Well, basically, Art the Clown is just like this murderous clown, and it's a really gory, it's an unrated movie with like really gory special effects. And like they're the
Okay.
kind of special effects that like are fake, but they're just gory for the sake of being gory.
Right.
Where there's this one scene where he basically kills this girl who was like she was a true crime lover in the movie. And he
Mhm.
hears in one scene, he's like standing in the hallway and he hears her just like fangirling out about the Art the Clown murderer and how she would love to like know what it's like to be in his presence and feel the fear of like talk to someone who felt the fear of knowing what it was like to almost be murdered by Art the Clown and stuff. And he's going like this and stuff. Well, he murders her later on in the movie and he takes his sunglasses and he puts them on her face and he goes, boop.
Oh my god.
I thought
See,
that
and
was
I would die like cuz I am the same way like Saw. The Saw franchise, like my child and I have seen every single one multiple times. Like we do big, long,
yeah.
drawn out marathons of watching them. And then I'm the same way with Final Destination. Like
And I just
weird
thought it
things
was
like that.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, looking around, my little sister took me for my birthday to go see it, and I'm just looking around the theater like, "Does anybody else find this hysterical?" And me and my little
Oh,
sister
yeah.
are laughing,
I
and I was like, "Wait a
remember.
minute, how bad is my trauma that I find this
Right.
hilarious?"
Well, and I remember when I was a kid, I was deathly afraid of the Amityville movies
Mhm.
and the Exorcist movies. But now as an adult that's been involved in the paranormal as long as I have, when I watch them, I laugh my ass off.
Oh, yeah.
Like I watched, oh, I can't think of the name of it. It's supposed to be a scary movie, Insidious.
Mhm.
But I was told a story about the people that some of the characters were modeled after, and I know them in the paranormal. And so every time I watch it now, I picture these two people and I bust up laughing and I can't stop. Like I watched it with my husband and I fell off the bed. I was laughing so hard. He's like, "What is wrong with you? This is supposed to be scary."
Now, do you find yourself, because I do this, because, like, I will read up on the paranormal, so, like, I'll read, like, the case study
Mhm.
or a story, or like you might know them in real life or read the case study, and then
Right.
you watch something and then you yell at it like a football game because you're like, "That's wrong."
Amityville.
Yeah.
Amityville is one I do that with. The Conjuring
Yeah.
is another one. The Enfield, the one that focused on the
The
Enfield
Enfield voices,
poltergeist.
yes. I'm like, "That's
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, you did that, and that, yeah,
That
no,
didn't
and
happen
then
that way. It
right, and
happened like
then,
this."
oh, the American Werewolf in London, which is, like, I think from the '80s or something like that.
Mhm.
It was when I became an adult, I actually found out because I learned like, a lo anything Ed and Lorraine Warren were involved in,
Yeah, I
I
read
soaked
so
up.
many of their case studies.
Right, and then, I was lucky enough that I had an opportunity to mentor with her for a
Mhm.
bit, and so for me, those cases were always intriguing. And I felt like finding out as an adult, the American Werewolf in London wasn't actually a real werewolf. It was a person with a disease.
Yeah.
And they made it into this horror movie about a werewolf, which I thought was the corniest horror movie ever. Like Freddy and Jason freaked me the frig out.
I
You know,
loved Freddy Krueger.
no, no, Michael Myers is the worst. If I'm out with the kids on Halloween and I see someone dressed as Michael Myers, I run. Like, we were on a camping a Camp Paranormal trip, and one of the, members of the team that I was on was dressed as Michael Myers sitting in the living room. When I came out of the bedroom, I flew. from one end of the building we ran to the other, and I was a big girl at the time, and I ran, and when we were heading home, we were in West Virginia that time, and he literally wanted to put on his Michael Myers mask and pass me on the highway. And his wife said, "Don't you dare do that because we will have to call her husband and tell him why she drove off the cliff." But I laughed about it after I heard it, but then I was like, "Yeah, I probably would have driven off the cliff."
Oh my god.
Yeah, I probably would have
So,
drove right off the mountain.
funny story about Jason. Not Jason, but Freddy Krueger. I had bad night terrors as a kid, like really bad night terrors as a kid. And I had a dream where I was being chased by like whatever monsters a kid's being chased by, you know. And Freddy Krueger would actually come in my dreams, and instead of like murdering me, he would save me from the monsters.
I
So
wish I
I
had that, man. I didn't have that. When I was a kid, my brother and sister and I was really little when the Poltergeist movie came out,
Mhm.
and they made me watch it. And I could have only been about 4 or 5, if that. And I remember I used to go around freaking out about all the closets in the house, and because we had a closet in our house that was haunted, like, literally, there
Oh,
was no electricity in it, but it would all of a sudden in the middle of the night just start glowing. So
oh,
I would, like, shut all the I'd be, like, freaking out. And then they would bring home the rag magazines, and this is where half my trauma comes from. They would bring home the, like, Weekly World News and stuff, and they'd be talking about vampires and werewolves coming to attack, and I literally, for, like, 3 years, slept on the floor in my parents' bedroom next to my mother holding her hand, because this is how traumatized I was. This is what happens when there's, like, a huge age gap. My brother and sister are 10 and 12 years older than me. So
oh.
yeah, so they and, like, they don't even didn't even understand until we were, like, adults how much trauma they put me through. And how much they caused my mental health issues, you know?
I used to be obsessed with the Weekly World News. I used to love all those crazy stories about like Bat Boy
Yes, and that stuff didn't bother me. It was when they were
and
talking about the
Bigfoot
vampire,
and
and now some of my closest friends are actual vampires, within that, energy vampire community, but
yeah,
back then, I thought they were like,
like gonna bite your neck
Dracula.
and like drain you of
Well,
blood
I
and
even know some of them too, and they don't scare me, but I thought of Dracula, "Oh my
yeah.
god, we're all gonna die." And, and it's just and that's why I think, like, my kids, they have their own struggles. I have 2 with autism and, one with, ADHD and anxiety and, a bunch of other stuff, and, but I never wanted them to be afraid of the things like I was.
Yeah,
So, like, they were the ones that went to school, and my youngest, I got called for children and youth because she, told all the kids about the fairies and how they didn't look like, Tinkerbell, and, she told them the truth about fairies through Irish folklore, and then she said, "But I like ghosts, and ghosts are good, and ghosts won't hurt you," and she had all the kids scared, and finally, her teacher literally said to the person that was gonna turn us in, was like, "You do know what her mother does, right?" And so then they would invite me on, like, we would do overnight field trips when they were in, I think it was 5th grade. They would do a weekend field trip to the camp around here. So they wanted me to be the chaperone all the time so I could tell them all ghost stories while
oh my god.
But yeah, and I think, that was important because I don't think any of us were really taught how not to be afraid of those things.
Yeah,
And, like, how, our families didn't realize how much we were traumatized by certain things.
yeah,
And how some of us were really not equipped to handle those traumas.
yeah. Now I have a question for you because this happened to me.
Mhm.
While I was going through like a lot of my traumas, I actually blocked my abilities. And then you said yours kinda came back as an adult. Well,
Yeah.
mine did too. Mine kinda slapped me in my face and said, "Howdy,
Yeah, pretty
I'm
much
here,
me
bitch."
too. Yeah.
Um, did Did you go through a period of time where you were just kind of blocking your abilities because you were going through your own trauma?
As a teenager, yes. But once I had that, breakdown as I call it, like literally that day when everything happened on September 11th, I experienced the pain. I felt the burning. I smelt the burning. I wasn't even there.
Mhm.
And I experienced it all as if I was. Like my cousin, whose wife worked for the company that was in the trade center who had gotten moved, he was what they called him a vampire. He was a blood runner for the hospitals.
Mhm.
He would pick up, and he witnessed it all. And him and our trauma from that, like our PTSD from that, is pretty much on the same level. And he was physically there and witnessed it all
Oh, wow.
as it was happening, and all I was just experiencing it through,
Yeah.
the people I knew and the people I cared about and the people that were there.
Yeah, I went through a decent amount of trauma in my teens. I was in a not so healthy relationship, and I I had a couple other things happen to me that, we don't really need to share on this podcast.
Right.
We just need to say I went through some trauma.
Yeah, I went through
I,
some crap.
I went through some shit, and I blocked my abilities, and it wasn't until like my mid-20s. I forget exactly how old I was, but I
I
when I
think
was like,
mid-20s is the thing because I was in
yeah.
my mid-20s when I could finally everything collapsed.
And like I'll say my abilities were there, but they were like muted. Like I could sense if a spirit was around, but I couldn't talk to them.
Now, I literally the last like, I never said things like I stopped talking around my parents, and the last
Mhm.
time I remember having any type of a feeling or any type of was I was in my, like, early teens, and someone that I really cared about and his best friend were in a car accident, and his best friend was killed.
Mhm.
And I remember like, literally, we were at a school dance, it was me and my one friend, we're in the bathroom, and I just looked at her, and I just knew something was wrong. And it wasn't until, like, my dad came to pick us up that, then I found out what had actually happened, but I knew already.
Yeah,
And then it was after that, I really didn't have any at all. Like, I think I totally because of experiencing that, I just blocked everything from that point until I was in my mid-20s, and everything
yeah,
just came bubbling out, and that's why I worked so hard with my kids, because when they started experiencing their abilities, I didn't want them to have the experiences I did.
exactly. Yeah, I started blocking in my teens. Like I was really gifted as a child, and then I started blocking in my teens. And then when I was like I could sense a spirit, but it wasn't like sensing a spirit now. Like I sense a spirit now, it's no different than if a human walks in the room.
Right.
But then it was more like a gentle gust of wind. Like I could
Mhm.
just sense something was
Yeah,
different.
see, yeah, I didn't get any of that. Like,
Yeah.
now for me, like, sometimes these spirits that I encounter when I'm doing mediumship work or working in the paranormal, a lot of times I don't even realize that they're spirits at first.
Mm.
And that's why I make the joke all the time when people say, "Who are you talking to?" Uh,
There's not there's no one
do
there?
you mean there's no one here with me? Like, seriously, there's no one here. Like, especially in Gettysburg, like when we're
Mhm.
driving around the battlefield, I do double takes because I don't know if
Well,
I'm
I've never been to
seeing every an
Gettysburg.
actor or if I'm seeing a spirit. Like, I don't know. Like, what is it? And then I look back and then I'll ask other people, "Did you see that?"
Yeah. So I had like kind of like a gentle, we'll call it a gentle awareness, but not like a full awareness of spirit. I had a couple paranormal experiences, but I just attribute it to the where I was living at the time was very active.
Mhm.
Even my mom, my brother-in-law, like everybody had experiences there. So I
I had
feel like
nothing.
even people who like weren't necessarily gifted were having experiences there. But then one day I kept smelling perfume, and I walked I was in an apartment, so I was walking from my bedroom to my living room through this hallway, and as soon as I got in my living room, there was an old woman in front of me, and she jumped me, showed
Oh,
me her
that
whole life and her whole death,
that was one of like, I had
and
never had that happen to me until I was an investigator, and that is a scary thing too.
it's traumatic. She showed me her whole life, her whole death, and all she wanted her kids to know is that she was sorry, so I guess she was estranged from her kids. I was a literal mess, and we lived not that far from a nursing home. So it was like after that happened, the floodgates were open. And then that was like 2015, 2016, I'd say
Right.
that happened. And it was around 2019 that I started like actually working with an investigator.
Yeah, see, with
And
me, I had it happen in all places in an asylum where I was jumped, a couple of times, but the one was so powerful, like, they had this entity, they called him, like, the creeper or the crawler,
mhm,
where he was just like a black figure that would crawl down the wall, and, I just stood there. Everybody else ran because I'm the sarcastic asshole I am. Everybody says, "What should we do? What should we do?" I'm like, "I don't know, run." And they did, and I stayed there, and I ended up on my ass. I didn't see anything, I didn't feel anything, I was just on my ass, laying on the floor, raising my hand about losing my exit buddy. And because that was the rule in that place, everybody had to have an exit buddy. And I'm like,
mhm,
"I can't find my exit buddy." And, then I was sick the rest of the night. Like, I was, like, on the floor to the point where, like, people on the team were it was a public event, but we were there running it with our team. And they kept saying, like, "Do we need to take you to the hospital?" And I'm like, "No, no, no. How what am I gonna say? I got jumped by the creeper, the crawler, and now I'm sick. No, no, thank you. I don't wanna spend no night in a foreign psych ward." And, the only time I felt good is when I left the building. And it was so weird because I think it's Amy Allen who does, one of the ghost shows on TV, actually was there after us,
mhm.
and she had really bad experiences in that same area where she had to leave the building.
There's something like after being jumped once, something that I'd really not rather have happen again. Like that to me is just like to have that woman show me her whole life like that was just like it
I had it's
traumatic.
scary, yeah, because
It is.
I had an entity, we don't know if it was human or not, we don't know, we just had recordings of it, speaking through me,
Ooh, creepy.
and it sounded like Gollum from Lord of the Rings.
Well, yeah, because they don't know how to control your vocal cords.
Yeah, it was awful, like, you could hear my friend trying to get me out of the basement saying, I've got you," and she starts praying over me because she's very devout Christian,
Mhm.
and then you hear this thing saying, "I got her. I got her." And yeah, it was bad. And at that was and then they said every time we would go back into that basement, they would watch and my eyes would start rolling in the back of my head. And then we literally started talking to other people in the field and they were like, they think something was trying to speak through me. And that I was just so inexperienced at the time that I didn't understand what it was doing and
Yeah,
that it just took complete control of me. So yeah, now I protect from that stuff. Nothing is getting in here unless they want to.
yeah.
So, but it looks like our hour is about up. So I'm gonna close out. Is there any information that you want to share with people, like how they can find you, how they can reach out to you, anything like that, if they would want to, or any information that you think is important for them?
Well, if anybody wants to find me, if they're interested in a reading or if they have any questions, um, divinations with an S by Dana at Gmail or divination by Dana at on Facebook. Um, so with an S, divinations by
Yeah.
Dana at Gmail.
And I'll have at least your Facebook linked
Yeah.
in the YouTube video for anybody that would need it. And any last pieces of advice?
It's just so I think everybody needs to go to therapy at least once in their life, and if you're a medium or if you're gifted, like, beyond the spiritual grounding, just please don't discount therapy. Like, I feel like everybody needs to have a therapist at least once in their life, and don't we live in such a culture where, like, first off, don't be men should have a therapist.
Amen.
Men We overlook men so much. Men, don't be afraid to go out and get help. Don't be afraid to get to see a therapist. You don't have to be tough. And we live in a world where we so overlook our mental health, and mental health is so important. Whether you're a medium, whether you're just dealing with something, don't be afraid to go out and get therapy. So many insurances cover it. And even if you don't have insurances, so many therapists are willing to work with you. Like, it is truly so important. And don't be afraid to take medication. Even if you are a medium, like me and Holly both said, we've noticed that we can take medication and it doesn't mess with your abilities. Like,
If
if
it's
you
the
need
right
it, take it.
combination. If it's the right combination, you should be fine.
Yeah. If it's the wrong combination, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself with your doctor, too.
Exactly.
Speak up for yourself. Just, doctors aren't God, they don't know everything. Don't be afraid to speak up for yourself and advocate for your own health. And if you can, doctors and therapists, you can date them. You don't have to stick with them just because they have a degree.
Amen to that too. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think this was such a great topic and that it's something that really people really need to pay attention to in the field. So
Exactly.
hopefully it helps someone.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I had
Well,
so much fun talking to you tonight.
I always have fun talking to y'all. So,
Yeah.
okay, we will talk soon.
All right.
From our friends at Got Knockers, Strange Knocks Magazine. Strange Knocks Magazine is your ultimate companion for exploring the enigmatic corners of our world. Delve into the shadows with us as we uncover the mysteries surrounding cryptids like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, and examine the tantalizing possibility of extraterrestrial life visiting Earth. Our pages are filled with compelling true crime stories that defy conventional explanation, alongside mind bending conspiracy theories that challenge the status quo. Whether you're a seasoned skeptic or a curious believer, Strange Knocks Magazine invites you to expand your horizons and entertain the unexplained. With captivating articles, expert interviews, and reader submissions, each issue promises to spark your imagination and thrill your sense of wonder. Join us in our quest to illuminate the unknown, one strange knock at a time. From our friends at Got Knockers, Strange Knocks Magazine, read the description for further information. The Amoss Healing Collective in Milton, Pennsylvania, your one-stop shop for crystals, candles, herbs, books, divination tools, self-care, and healing. Amoss offers a multitude of classes for your metaphysical and witchy needs. Check them out on Broadway Street in Milton, Pennsylvania. Amoss Healing Collective. Look for more information in the description.